Okay, so just to summarize the last point that we did yesterday, which is a little bit tricky. We were talking about the difference between providence for people and providence for animals, let's say. And we have on our table two concepts of providence. One is causation, control, and management, making things happen. And the other is a purpose that God wants to be operative in the world, something that should be achieved in the world. Where providence can refer in Hebrew to either the causation, management, and control, or can refer to the purpose, which could be a variety of purposes. And the difference in human beings and animals is only on the side of purpose. It's not on the side of causation, management, and control. I read to you two places where the Rambam says that God's providence extends to everything in the creation down to the tiniest detail. That's causation, management, and purpose, and control. Purposes are different. When you distinguish between people and animals, you're not distinguishing what God does, you distinguish why He does it, for what purpose He does it. So now, for human beings, one purpose, which the Rambam has stressed in this chapter at great length, is justice. That doesn't apply to animals. Justice doesn't apply, and the Rambam gave us an explanation of why it is, by the basis of the way that providence operates, why it applies to people and not to animals. What purposes do apply to animals? So the Rambam stresses one purpose, a general purpose, one that's always operating, is the preservation of groups, categories, species. Even though I told you species is a misleading word, groups and categories, let's put it that way. Now the question is, what kind of mechanism is it that operates so as to preserve categories? And here there are two possibilities, one of which I can't spell out philosophically, it would take me too far afield, but abstractly, there are two possibilities. Either in your picture of the world, there are different things, different kinds of things. You know, there are stones and vegetation which grow, and animals which behave, human beings, and then there are angels and spheres and stars and groups. Groups of things in the world. Real things. You have the books on the table, each one of them, and you have the group of the books on the table, of which is only one. There may be nine books on the table, but there's one group. When you use numbers, the numbers attach to groups. 9 is the size of the group of books on the table. How big is the group? 9, because it has 9 members. The size of a group is the number of members that it has. No book on the table is 9. Each book on the table is one book. So for this picture, there are real things in the world called groups. Well, then maybe if you have an interest in preserving a group, at least it arises abstractly, I want the group to be preserved, and the group is one of the things in the world, so I should act on the group so as to make the group preserved. Make sure the group doesn't disappear. Just like I can make sure that the pencil on the table doesn't disappear, I tell my 4-year-old, don't touch the pencil. So I could make sure that the group doesn't disappear. A group is a thing, and I'm acting so as to preserve the thing. That's the least possible. The Rambam rejects that with 2 hands. Groups aren't things. Groups aren't in the world. When we talk about groups, we're talking about mental conceptions. They're all in your head. Mm-hmm. All there is in the world is books, individual books. No groups. Then what does it mean to act, to control, to manage the world in such a way that the group won't disappear? There's no group to act on. The word group just refers to my brain. We're not talking about keeping people around to think about it. We're talking about books and rats and apple pies and who knows what. So the only access that you have to make sure that a group doesn't disappear is the access of operating on the concrete things in the world which are the members of the group. There's no other access you have. If you're going to cause the group to continue to exist, you got to do that by interacting with the individual things that are the members of the group. There's nothing else to interact with. There's anything else there to be to serve as an object of activity. So it means that, and the way this is normally understood is you do it through the laws of nature by providing food for each group and then providing protection from the predators that will eliminate the group by overgrazing, and that's the way you do it. What you're really doing is providing circumstances for individual cats, let's say, so that there will always be cats. But the provision is by arranging the world for the individual cats. It's only that. The goal of arranging it for the individual cats is not that this cat should have a pleasant life, and not that this cat should live until 22. It's that there should continue to be cats. And cats shouldn't disappear. So here the distinction between causation, management, and control on the one hand, and the purpose is very, very important. Since in the actual managing of the world, there are only individual cats. That's all there are. There are no groups of cats. So that's why the distinction has to be a distinction in terms of purpose. And they get, in terms of management and control, they get exactly the same causation that human beings do, just for a different purpose. Yeah.
I remember in the portion when the Malach Mavet was the plague for Mitzrayim, the dogs didn't bark. So there was certain schut they had. I don't remember exactly what was the reward, but I wanted to ask about what's how to understand that scenario under these concepts. Since there was, I don't remember exactly what was the reward.
Yeah. But, so I think you have to put those words that the dogs were rewarded for not barking in the same context that you would put, for example, cover up the chalas. Cover up the chalas before you make kiddush. Why? So that the chalas won't be embarrassed by seeing you pass them over to make the blessing on the wine and not make the blessing on the bread first, which you really should do. Cover them up so they shouldn't be embarrassed. Are we really thinking of embarrassing the challah? Would they really feel bad? Protecting their feelings, the challah? Moses couldn't strike the Nile. Couldn't strike the Nile because the Nile protected him when he was put in the basket of the Nile. So he owes it a debt of gratitude. He has to have Aaron strike it. Gets struck, but not by him. The land, he can't strike the land because when he killed the Egyptian, he buried it in the ground, and the ground accepted the body and helped him escape from Pharaoh. So he can't hit it. This is not literal embarrassment. This is not literal gratitude. We don't think that the Nile and the land did good things. They deserve a reward for it. I think the dogs are no different. Dogs are animals. Animals have no free will. They're not good or evil. But they didn't bark, and that was a benefit for the Jews. And so HaKadosh Baruch Hu arranged the world by doing what? Meat that we can't eat. There's a preference to give it to a dog. That's for us to act out our relationship to something from which we had a benefit. But it's not to say that the dogs have merit because they're not moral agents, right? And we have this over and over again, where you act out a certain attitude towards something from which you had a benefit, or are affecting in a certain way. Because it has to teach you what kind of characteristics you have to have. We mentioned this briefly about Tzar Ba'alei Chaim. The commentaries agree that the reason why we are commanded not to cause unnecessary pain, which leaves open the door that you can cause pain, right? Not to cause unnecessary pain, and even to act so as to relieve natural pain from animals. Before the animal falls into a well and is suffering, we should do something to help the animal, but not because relieving pain for an animal is a value unto itself, but we have to learn to be merciful. It's inculcating our character traits. It's not because the pain of the animal is an intrinsically bad thing. So I think all these descriptions of which we would apply moral qualities to animals are not meant literally. They're not meant literally. Yeah.
How would you respond to the critic who would say, in the same way that you're trying to suggest that groups can't exist because they're just a collection of parts, the same thing could be said for individual objects. I could say that book, for instance, there's not a book, it's just pages. This is the same thing here. I'm denying the fact that the things that compose the actual object are a collection of things. I just call the things out individually. If that makes sense.
No, because that's the confusing sets with extended wholes, what's called mirrorology, where it isn't that the book is a set of pages, it's pages glued together. The individual pages aren't members in a set. There's no set there at all. There's a thing that has parts. The pages are parts of the book. The part-whole relationship is something which is not mysterious in any way. We described the other day how mysterious the idea of a set is. It doesn't require a mental activity, and it's all physical. It's all on the same plane. Sets are abstract, and the objects that are the members are concrete. Here, the pages and the book are both physical. They're both concrete. You're not crossing any metaphysical boundaries. So one of the exercises that nominalists go through is to use part whole for the talk that we have of things and other things as much as you can, because there the understanding is transparent, and only with great reluctance do you go over to abstract things when your back is to the wall.
Would there be cases of metaphysical vagueness and where an object starts and ends then?
No.
Would that be a kind of that wouldn't exist then?
I don't think so. There's maybe physical vagueness, but not a metaphysical vagueness. Why should there be? I'm sure. I mean, maybe you're missing something, but I don't see any reason for that. Yeah, back.
What did you say yesterday about the color blue example, that Rambam rejects the entire premise?
So that's a little different. That's not a group. That's a property, a quality. But nominalists reject qualities also, because they're abstract. A little bit of it, you see, the example that I gave you was what in the language we would call a plate display, with the idea of a quality that doesn't have anything that possesses it. That means it's completely abstract. Aristotle will reject that entirely. You have blue books, and The blue book has a color, but the color is, so to speak, part of the book. That's something external to it which could be in a relationship to it. The example that I gave is with missing color blue, is where the blue is independent of anything in the world. The example that I gave, there isn't anything in the world with that color. And yet we talk about the color and we register the color. There's a color, there's an unrepresented color in our world. Well, that kind of talk is going to be abstract. And real nominalists will say, no, we don't talk that way. We don't talk that way. Well, again, I said the Rambam talks about groups. He doesn't outline a total nominalist position in metaphysics. But these are two things that go hand in hand in normal philosophical sources. The nominalists were against both groups and properties.
So was his position, is his position Aristotelian, or is this like just his own original?
The Rambam is his own man. He takes some things from Aristotle and some things from Plato, and some things he rejects both of them, and he has his own ideas. The Rambam does not recognize any authority other than Torah, logic, and sensation. Aristotle is not an authority for him.
Right.
This is a gigantic mistake in the academic world. What's his name? Northwestern. I shouldn't even, but oh gosh, I can't think of his name. Professor Northwestern has done a lot of work on Aristotle, on Rambam, sorry, and he wrote the article on the Rambam in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. And I think he did a very good job. I read one of his books also. He does a very good job, and he made two very important points. And one is the Rambam's not an Aristotelian, full stop. And the second he said is there's a great deal of literature trying to figure out the Rambam's secret message. The secret that he covered up and then only wanted the initiated to understand that he really is an Aristotelian or other things, so and so on, is I think that with someone like the Rambam, you're better off interpreting his words and not guessing at his secret doctrines. I think that's also 100% correct. The people who are doing the guessing are utterly incompetent to guess.
Clearly rejected Platonism already, sort of, kind of a...
He rejected, as a system, he rejected Platonism, he rejected Aristotle, both of them. And he says why? Because because of the creation of the world, Plato believed that there is a hiyuli, a prime matter, and that prime matter is independently eternal.
Right.
And all God does for Plato is to form it. Now the Rambam says, in part 2, chapter 25, he says, Aristotle's view makes miracles impossible, and that makes it simply unacceptable. The Rambam's view, Plato's view, since there is an independent agency giving form to matter and can change the form that matter has, so then miracles are possible. So the absolute objection that we have against Aristotle doesn't apply to Plato. But we have a principle, and that is what the Torah tells us is absolute truth. So he has rules for interpreting the Torah, the kinds of interpretations which could be used, and one of the rules is that a proof that something's right is a reason to reinterpret within limits. And he says the following: if there were a proof that Plato was right, then we would be able to reinterpret the verses because it's within the limits of reinterpretation. But there isn't a proof that Plato is right. That being the case, we don't reinterpret. And since we don't reinterpret, the Torah is telling us that Plato is wrong. So Plato is out. He's out because he violates the verses.
Interesting. It's almost
But if there were a proof, then I wrote something on this, but I didn't publish it yet. If there were a proof, we'd be able to reinterpret. With Aristotle, if there were a proof that Aristotle is right, we would not be able to reinterpret because it goes beyond the bounds of acceptable interpretation. And then we would have an absolute contradiction between what Aristotle says, which we are proposing would have a proof, and what the Torah says that can't be reinterpreted. And at the end of the chapter, he says we would have to go on to other things. And you have people, supposedly responsible people, who say that the Rambam says that if you could prove Aristotle, you'd reinterpret. It's absolutely wrong. Absolutely wrong. Friedlander, who's very good, writes that in his introduction. It's an absolute mistake. And all the other ones, they're just absolutely wrong. Read the chapter carefully, you'll see it. And if you have any doubts, write to me and I'll share with you what I wrote on it.
He has a way of kind of verifying philosophical systems, right? It's basically in terms of their kind of...
I'm not hearing you. I'm getting
He can verify philosophical systems by looking at, or kind of philosophical kind of views by its compatibility with Torah.
Of course, for the Rambam, and for this was a general view in medieval philosophy.
Right.
There are three sources of reliable knowledge. One is abstract, logical, and mathematical thinking, and one is the religious tradition, and one is sense perception. And the problem that he envisions, if there were a proof for Aristotle, would be that your abstract logical thinking, which is one source of truth, and your tradition, another source, would conflict. And if you have the two out of the three top sources of reliable knowledge conflicting with one another, then you're really in trouble. You're really in trouble. But that wouldn't happen for Plato, because the proof of Plato would just tell us to reinterpret the verses, and we would reinterpret that. Rambam has a very sophisticated view there. Most of what I'm telling you now I got from Rabbi Weissman, if not all of it. Yeah.
I want to make sure I'm understanding the two types of providence correctly. We have causation and control and purpose. Is that correct?
Yeah, but now when you say it that way, you say it's misleading. I'm not sure now we're talking about the same concept. You can talk about two types of fruit, right? You can talk about an apple and a pear. That's where I would say two types. But suppose we're going to contrast an apple with a baseball game. It's two types of what? Well, they're different in different categories. Not two types in one category. It's just.
Aren't we calling them both divine providence?
Yes. We're using the same word, but the word, in fact, refers. Take bank. Okay. You can bank your money, and you can bank the plane.
Oh.
Well, BANK both times. Yeah, but one is in putting your resources in a financial institution. The other is tilting the wheel, tilting the wings of the plane. They're both called bank. That doesn't mean they can't be in two entirely different categories. Now, I'm not talking about two things in the same general category. One is a description of activity that brings about certain changes.
Reward and punishment for our actions.
Yeah, but those words can be used for a purpose also. Those words are ambiguous between the two types.
Causation and control, I'm understanding as because of the way or the choices that I make with my free will, Hashem is changing the circumstances.
No, that's not the right way to understand it.
Okay.
Causation is causation. The water causes the cloth to become wet. The water dissolves the salt. The causation says nothing about whether it's good or bad, accidental or on purpose. It happened because of a flood or it happened because there was a leak in the roof. The water is dissolving the salt. That's all. It's just a simple causal interaction. No purpose is built into this concept. This concept describes an activity that has certain results. That's all.
How does that apply to humans then?
The weather is the weather that determines whether I use the heat in my house or don't use the heat in my house, because the weather it triggers the bimetal switch, and the rain is what which makes it important for me to use an umbrella. I mean, it waters my flowers, it makes my flowers grow. It's just a fact that has consequences. That's all.
Whereas for animals, they don't care about those things.
But we're not talking about what animals care about or people care about. I'm talking about any of that.
Okay.
This, how can I say it to you? It's like saying oxygen is necessary for life, in particular for human life, right? That doesn't mean whether you're good or bad, live, old or young, healthy or sick, whether you have good plans or bad plans. Oxygen is necessary, otherwise the person dies. That's all it is, right? That's a physical fact, a pure physical fact. Nothing other than the physical fact is what's being described. One concept of providence is the description of facts, because Baruch Hu's creative power brings about certain things to happen. It brings about things to happen to people, to animals, to trees, to stars. He brings about things that happen. That's all.
So animals do have causation and control.
Of course. Everything does.
I thought we said they only had the purpose part.
On the opposite, the exact opposite. It's causation and control that is blankets the whole of the creation. I read two passages where the Rabbi says that providence goes down to the tiniest detail of the entire creation. I said that's causation, control, and management. Just making things happen. That's all. Why does the wing of the mosquito beat, and why does it beat at that speed? Because the Baruch Hu makes that happen. So pasuk. That doesn't have no description whatsoever why he wants that to happen, what purposes it serves, what could it be otherwise. I'm just talking about the fact that this is how it happens.
Okay, so the fish not caring about which fish eats which other fish.
Caring is purpose. Caring is out of the picture.
Okay.
The fish will catch this fly because the laws of nature that govern its activity at this time determine that it will catch this fly. And that's where Baruch Hu caused it to catch this fly.
Thank you for clarifying.
Okay. I know because, if it were like an apple and a pear, it would be much easier to understand. You've got a general group, and these are two items in the group. It's not like that. They come from different networks. One is physical, one is activity that produces consequences, and the other is purposes, goals, projects. They're not in the same category at all.
Not my purpose to Hashem, but purpose of events.
Well, we're talking about divine providence, and we're talking about His purposes. We're talking about His purposes. For what reason does He make things happen? And that's where there's a difference between people and animals. In particular, for people, He makes things happen to individuals because of the state of that individual. Whereas for animals, He doesn't make things happen to this fish because of the state of this fish. He makes things happen to this fish because of its results for fish. And it could have been another fish just as much if it would have the same results for fish, the species, the category. That's what I'm saying now. So you have all right, yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
At which point does free will fall into the picture between causation and purpose?
So free will is a reason for a particular purpose. The purpose is justice, and only free-willed creatures can be treated with justice. So it's a precondition for a certain purpose being applied. And that's why justice only applies to human beings, because only human beings have free will.
So it's relevant of causation. It only has to do with the purpose.
I don't know what irrelevant means here. It doesn't mean God can go on vacation to do nothing and still have the same purpose. It's like talking about the weight of a piece of uranium and its radioactivity. You say, well, radioactivity is something else, so I guess it doesn't matter about weight. Maybe it won't have no weight, or we'll just ignore it. No. Uranium has weight, it has density, right? It has hardness, and it has radioactivity. It has lots of things, right? It's all one thing, and it has all those qualities. Providence couldn't be providence if God weren't doing anything. You just talk about His purposes. If He wasn't doing anything to fulfill those purposes, you wouldn't call it providence.
So free will could still play into that first category?
Let's suppose somebody's. I'll try one with one more analogy. Otherwise, I think we're going to run out of material. Let's suppose somebody is writing an essay on a computer. So I could ask, what language is he writing in? What is the intended audience of the essay? How's he going to advertise it? I could also ask, how much electricity is he using? How much wear and tear is there on the computer? When's he going to have it fixed next? Maybe you should replace the Intel chip because it's 2 years old and it's not efficient. Do you hear that there are different concerns in different categories? One is the machine, how the machine works, how much money it costs. I don't care what you're typing on it. You could just hold down the A key and you just type A's forever. Wouldn't matter. I'm talking about how the machine works and what it does. In the other case, on the other hand, I'm talking about the content, the intellectual content, the social consequences, and so on and so on. Now they're both going on. If I turn off the computer so it doesn't type, you can't write the essay. But the essay production is one thing, and using electricity is a different thing. And you talk about them separately. And here we're talking about, I hope the analogy is clear, talking about the computers like talking about causation, management, and control, and talking about the essays like talking about the purposes. God acts in the world for purposes. The actions are both causal actions, and they're for a purpose. But these are two aspects of what's going on, and you can talk about the two aspects separately. Just like you can talk about the computer separately from the essay, even though they're both being done on the computer.
What we do versus why we do it.
But we're not talking about us, we're talking about divine providence now. We're talking about what God is doing and why He does it. We're talking about His providence running the world. And there are two things to say. One thing to say is, how does He get it done? How far does it go? Does He go down to every detail, or leave things to chance, or go on vacation? What's the process that He has for making things happen, that makes things happen? The other is, why is He doing it? What are His goals? What is He trying to accomplish? They're both going on always simultaneously, but they're two different aspects of what's going on. And you can discuss them separately. And the point that we're making is that in terms of causation and control, causation and control are equal across the board. For the Kohen Gadol and for the mosquito and for the clod of dirt that falls into the river and dissolves. All of them get equal causation and control. But the purposes for which they happen are very, very different from one another. That's a way to summarize it. Okay, I think you can think about it and see. It became clear. Okay, so now here, the middle of 24, the Rambam sums up, and here again will be a good example of how careful the Rambam is with his different categories. The acts of Hashem are, as it were, enumerated. How He provides for each species the necessary food and the means of subsistence, what we think of as the food chain and the protection from predators and that sort of thing. This is clear and plain. Aristotle likewise holds that this kind of providence is necessary and is in actual existence. Now, Aristotle says there is a providence providing for these things, but his conception of the providence is utterly, utterly different. For Aristotle, the providence comes from the ultimate laws that govern how the world works, and that is governed by an intelligence which is the ultimate top of the causal chain for the events of the world to take place, and everything is necessary. Nothing could be other than it is. That's because there's no creator, there's no free will, there's no choice, there's just an absolutely necessary world. Things that happen by nature are absolutely necessary. They could not be otherwise than they are. That's utterly different from the Rambam, utterly different. The point they have in common is there is a providence that provides for the continuous existence of categories. That they have in common. But for the Rambam, it's the will of the Creator which he could change and eliminate and rearrange by will without any possible limitation of what he could do. And for Aristotle, it's absolutely necessary. So here there's a superficial overlap between the Rambam and Aristotle, but if you look into the inner character of the thing, they're utterly different. Alexander also notices this fact in the name of Aristotle, that every species has its nourishment prepared for its individual members, otherwise the species would undoubtedly have perished. Now he respects Alexander, who's not Jewish, but he was a famous interpreter and expositor of Aristotle, and he quotes him often. Does not require much consideration to understand this. Now, here is what we can skip what I wrote here because I've said it over and over again. There is a rule laid down by our sages that it is directly prohibited in the law to cause pain to an animal. And it is based on the words, not everybody agrees to the Rambam's source, why have you hit your donkey? So Bilam is on the way to curse the Jewish people, and God sends an angel who was invisible to Bilam to inhibit the journey, and he blocks the donkey, and Bilam is upset. The third time, he actually hits the donkey with a stick and says, if I had a sword, I would kill you. And then the angel appears to Bilam. Well, that's a big surprise. And he changes his attitude, of course. And the angel says to Bilam a number of things, one of which is, why did you hit the donkey? Now, having read that passage, at least 200 times, but when the Rambam puts it here, I realized I wasn't really awake when I read it. Why does he say that? Why does the angel say to Bilam, why did you hit the donkey? What role does that play in the story? What he says to him is, you're going out to do something that I don't want you to do, and I told you I didn't want you to do it, and the donkey hadn't turned aside, I would have killed you. Okay, I hear all of that. But he says to him, why did you hit the donkey? Like, so what? What's the angel's interest in saying that? Says the Rambam, because you don't hit animals. You don't do that. That's where you see it from. We learn it from unpacking the animals that are packing and unpacking animals that need help. But it's very interesting, the Rambam's use of the verse here. Okay, so we are prohibited, cause pain to an animal, and I told you that it's unnecessary pain. If you need the animal to do a job for you, then you can subject it to pain. But the object of this rule is to make us perfect. That we should not assume cruel habits. And we should not uselessly cause pain to others, meaning people. If you're used to causing pain arbitrarily to animals and hearing them cry and scream and try to escape, that you become hard. If you become hard, you're likely to do it to people, and in circumstances in which you shouldn't do it to people. The Rambam is saying this because, given what he has told us, that justice and moral status doesn't apply to animals, he's telling us that they don't play a role in moral considerations. Telling us they don't play a role in moral considerations. Yes?
What would be the Torah view then on a situation where a country wants to build a pipeline that's going to disrupt the habitat of animals and maybe make them extinct? Is that unneeded pain or suffering to animals? If it's for a societal cause?
Well, first of all, we distinguish between direct and indirect causation. That would be a grubba in our terminology, between indirect causation. And habitats, that's the causation is too indirect to come under the rubric of causing them pain. I mentioned a moment ago that we have a responsibility to save them from pain. But all of that is when it's consistent with not interfering with human needs. When you have an animal plowing, and the plow can be heavy, and the ground can be rough, and the animal will have to strain, and that's perfectly permissible. So, if it's like, I think it was this Rabbi Yehuda was asked about hunting. And the question was, I'm not hunting for food. I'm hunting because I like to, chase. I like the victory of killing the animal, and so forth and so on. Absolutely not. But hunting for food? Absolutely.
Okay.
And that might cause pain to the animal. So what? You need food. It's permissible. It's permissible to kill the animals for food. And the Rambam said that explicitly. So, should you kill them in a painless way? Well, the way in which the Torah prescribes is certainly without fancy modern technology, is a very humane and painless way. We have the testimony of Temple Grand for that. I don't know how many have heard of Temple Grand, but she's a professor of animal behavior at the University of Texas. She happens to be a person with autism, and she's a professor and does research and publishes papers and everything else. Oliver Sacks spent time with her, and I read about her there. And she was famous, and I think it was the Agudas Israel of America, invited her to inspect slaughtering and give her opinion, a professional opinion, on whether or not it's humane, and she said it was. So, if you have people who are raising the flag, you can, and she's of course not Jewish. So the Rambam says that's, and then he says, so the purpose of it is that we should not, on the contrary, we should prepare to show pity and mercy to all living creatures, except when necessity demands the contrary. When the soul longs to eat flesh, we should not kill animals for the purpose of practicing cruelty or for the purpose of play. That's pretty direct. It's pretty clear. But, if you have to catch the animals and the animals, you chase them and the animals are afraid, okay, but you're using them for food. Yeah.
Would this at all compare to, I guess, the Kantian view, to which my knowledge would be, when you cause suffering to animals, it's not an issue for the animal, but it's an issue because you're showing a bad character trait in yourself?
I think it's close to that, but the badness of the character trait, see, with Kant it's a little tricky. The badness of the character trait is only realized when it's applied to people. What Kant would say is, you did an action, you can divide the action into the change in the world and its consequences versus what is going on in terms of your character, but that's the same action. So Kant could say that when you bring pain to the animal, the character trait of bringing pain is a bad character trait, even when applied to an animal. He wouldn't restrict it to people. If it's a bad character trait, it may be bad. He's not required to restrict it, but the Rambam is restricting it that way.
Oh, so how does the Rambam differ then? Because
I just said how he differs.
I know. What I'm saying is, I don't see the difference here. So you're saying it's only. I understand. I guess Kant's view is that
go back to the challahs.
Yeah.
Is there any damage in the world if I make kiddush without covering the challahs?
No.
The challahs aren't really embarrassed.
Yeah.
So there's nothing. Here you could say there's nothing wrong with what happened, other than you are expressing a part of your psychology, which, when applied to people, could be bad.
I understand. So it's not just the expressing the type of behavior that would be bad. It's specifically the type of behavior that would be bad because when we apply it to people, it would be bad.
And that's why it's prohibited here. To instill that character trait. That's right. This is based on a whole complicated sugya in the Gemara. Okay, so now you see, and now I say in the black, in the heavy. In other words, do not think that because we are forbidden to cause useless pain to animals, that there is a specific divine purpose that a particular animal should not suffer. That's why the relationship between the two paragraphs in the Rambam. You say don't cause pain to animals. That means when you cause pain to this animal, something bad happened to this animal, which makes this animal different from other animals, and so forth and so on. He wants to avoid that. It's not because this animal's fortunes go worse because it's in pain. That's not why we're being told to prohibit restrict ourselves not to cause pain to animals. That's not the right reason. The right reason is because of our own character development. Okay, so now let's finish this up and then maybe I'll print some more for tomorrow. Let's summarize what this chapter teaches about our main question. Are some people abandoned by divine providence to the blind forces of nature? Or are the lives of all people directed by individual divine providence throughout their lives? We have seen that aside from trials, which I have yet to explain to you, divine justice is absolutely without exception. Nothing happens to any person that is unjust. Now, this isn't bad. You see, here I put it negatively. This thing with the negative and positive that I said a few days ago when we started this, I didn't come to it until I started teaching you that that's the way to put it. Nothing happens that's unjust. All pleasures and pain, no matter how trivial, correspond to the person's good and bad actions. Now, trials I haven't explained to you. I think that's what I may have.
We talked about trials.
Yeah, but I didn't give you the answer. Okay, I'll set it up now and we'll talk about it tomorrow. The Rambam said that don't worry about trials. I'll explain it to you. What was the worry? The worry is that when you put a person through a trial, usually you cause them pain. And the kinds of trials we're talking about, Abraham with the sacrifice of his son, or the trials of the not having a constant supply of food in the wilderness for the Jewish people. It doesn't seem that these pains are punishment for failures in the past. Doesn't seem that that's so. So then it would be, at least on the surface, a counterexample to his principle. He says, don't worry, I have a whole chapter on trials, and I'll explain it to you. Now, in the chapter on trials, he says that there are two problems that the idea of trials raise. One is, you may think that the purpose of the trial, because it does cause pain, the purpose of the trial is to increase your reward in the world to come, and I told you that can't be right. I told you I disagree with that idea in the Talmud, which is interpreted to mean that. So I've got to solve that. I've got to give you the purpose of the trial in such a way that it doesn't imply its value is in causing you pain so that later you should get a bigger reward. It's got to have some other purpose than that. And he says the other problem that trials raise is it makes it sound like God puts the person through the trial so that God can come to know what the person will do, to find out the information about the person. Of course, God is omniscient, so that also is a terrible thought. So he says, I'm going to explain it to you and everything will be fine. And his answer is that the purpose of trials is two related purposes: to teach people what they are to believe or what they are to do. That's the purpose of trials. You put people, individuals or a group, through certain paces. Observers look at them and say, aha, he did that. That's an example of what people can do. That's an example of what people should do, what people should strive for. He's embodying a certain principle or a certain belief. Those are the things that people should believe. That's the purpose of trials. So it's not putting people in pain to give them a bigger reward in the world to come. No, that's not the purpose at all. The purpose is to teach people what to believe and what to do. Okay, got it. He goes through almost all the verses in the trials in the Torah and shows that that's what they're about. Yeah, but now, what happened to the pain? The pain is still there. And has he explained to me why the pain in the trial isn't a counterexample to his principle that pains apply to people only when they are a punishment for a past failure? I didn't hear any explanation. So I'll just give you the hint that I've given. Oh, if you distinguish in your mind two ideas. One is everything God does is just. And the other idea is nothing God does is unjust. It's a much weaker idea. there might be things to which justice doesn't apply. The question of justice doesn't arise. Then, for those things, it wouldn't be right to say that they're just. Justice doesn't arise, doesn't apply. It wouldn't be right to say they're unjust either, because justice doesn't arise and it doesn't apply. I think that's the Rambam solution. I'll explain to you tomorrow how that works. I'll explain to you.
Is that only applicable to physical pain, or
No. It's a moral distinction. It's a moral distinction, not a metaphysical distinction.